of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, breaking news against the president's perceived enemies. The Attorney General of the state of New York, Letitia James, just indicted on fraud charges, according to the Associated Press. The news coming just a day after former FBI Director James Comey pleaded not guilty to his own indictment handed down by the Department of Justice. We'll have more on the developments regarding James just moments away. Plus, a breakthrough in the Middle East as Israel and Hamas agree to a deal.
We reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace.
The president marking the first step in a deal between Israel and Hamas that could see the return of remaining Israeli hostages as soon as Monday. We'll get into the details of the agreement and the president's potential trip to the region this weekend when Aaron David Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, joins us. Plus, the shutdown stalemate gripping Washington now in day 9, both sides sticking to their arguments tonight without much room to reach middle ground. As Congress member head before the cameras before leaving town, we'll speak to lawmakers in the Senate as they look for a path forward when Senator Shelley Moore Capito and Senator Jerry Moran join us this hour. Also, the $20 billion currency swap just made to save Argentina's financial markets. Details on the financial rescue package up ahead. We've got a lot to cover, though we begin with the major breaking news that just crossed the wires a few moments ago. The Attorney General of the state of New York, who has investigated the president's business dealings, has now been indicted following an investigation by the Justice Department, according to the Associated Press. The indictment tonight coming after the president's repeated calls for her prosecution and the prosecution of those like former FBI Director James Comey and Senator Adam Schiff and others. Joining us now with the details as we know them surrounding Comey's court appearance and, of course, more about this indictment of Letitia James, Bloomberg's Myles Miller. Myles, it's great to have you with us. What do we know beyond the basic concept of mortgage fraud in this case?
Right, yeah. So this is a case that has focused on a vacation home that Tish James, New York's Attorney General, purchased in the Eastern District of Virginia. It's a home that her niece lives in, but it appears on a mortgage document she may have listed it as her primary residence. Now, when Bill Pulte, the new federal head of the Mortgage Association, came in, he took a look at mortgages done by publicly elected officials and other people who are appointed to different positions. He says this is fraud. He referred it to the Eastern District of Virginia. The last person, Erik, who was the federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia, took a look at the evidence in this case and determined that there was not enough evidence to prove a federal crime. The president asked for his had put in Lindsay Halligan, one of his personal attorneys. She herself took this case to the grand jury and was able to get one count indicted. It's this count of mortgage fraud, where James Comey was just indicted and went into court as well.
All right, Myles, thank you for jumping on the line with us. Bloomberg's Myles Miller, our senior national security correspondent, as we add another voice to this story to discuss the significance of this case. Bloomberg Law's Keith Alexander. Keith, I know this is brand new and we're just learning about what this, I believe, single charge includes. This case is still sealed. What can you tell us?
Well, again, this case really deals with this vacation home that New York Attorney General Letitia James purchased right here in Eastern Virginia, of course, of Virginia. Whether or not, now, prosecutors say that she listed this home as her primary residence, although she has told people that this was a vacation home. But President Trump and people have said this, that she should be prosecuted, that she should be charged with mortgage fraud, that she lied on applications and pretty much used this home as her primary residence when it really wasn't.
There was reporting today in the Wall Street Journal that the post on Truth Social that President Trump made directed at the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was in fact supposed to be a direct message. It did lead off with Pam, and his encouraging words to go after the likes of James Comey and Letitia James. We're actually showing that to our viewers right now on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. If that is the case, how does it impact the way we should look at this?
Well, what's most interesting, with that social media post is the fact that President Trump's own appointee, Lindsay Halligan, she was the one who had to present this case to the grand jury. She could not, it seems like, couldn't get a prosecutor to stand in and present this case how it's normally done. And so she had to do it herself. What this is suggesting to some people who are looking at this case is what's happening in this office now with prosecutors. Is she now running over prosecutors to do things that the president has asked her to do in connection to the social media post that he put out there? That's what people are now looking at, is just who actually really is running this office.
Well, you wonder how that might impact the case itself, or if it ever does, in fact, go to trial. The president has talked a lot about Letitia James before and after getting back into the White House. He's called her guilty as hell. Looks to me like she's really guilty of something. How does that also impact the way a trial would be handled?
Well, what's going to be also interesting, and I'm sure the defense attorneys are going to argue that by the president making these public statements, it could very well affect a jury pool and find if it should go to trial, that the president has made these statements publicly, repeatedly, and it could be a challenge in terms of finding individuals who might be impartial to serve on a jury.
Wouldn't want to be Adam Schiff right now. Keith, is he next?
It's going to be interesting to see who is next, but the president has shown that when he wants something to be done within the Department of Justice, someone's going to carry it out.
It's great to have you. Bloomberg Law's Keith Alexander in the clutch. Keith, let us know as we learn more about this case, as we now add the voice of Kate Sullivan, Bloomberg White House correspondent, who's with me here in Washington. This really sort of is another brick in a wall that the president has been building for some time here, having ran on the idea of retribution when it comes to his political enemies. Will there be more where this came from?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that still remains to be seen. He was asked about this a few weeks ago, and I think, he said that, asked about the James Comey indictment and the potential indictment, and he said, there isn't a list, but I certainly think that there will be more. So this is definitely a space that we're watching, I think, and you're completely correct. I think so much of his campaign was talking about the weaponization of government, the overreach, referencing and really railing against the charges that he faced, the ultimate criminal conviction. So it's pretty stunning to see what's happening, and I think you're absolutely right. This is something that we'll continue to be watching.
Well, it wasn't the big story at the White House until a few moments ago. In fact, this was a big day for President Trump to announce a ceasefire that has now been accepted by both Israel and Hamas. The implementation of that ceasefire is just now beginning. The president openly lobbying for the Nobel Peace Prize today. Will this be enough to get it to him? It's announced tomorrow morning.
That's a great question. I guess we'll have to see what happens. He, of course, has been publicly lobbying for it. Members of his family, members of the administration have been publicly lobbying for it.
Yeah.
I think, we did get some news from the president today in that cabinet meeting when it comes to this. He said that the Israeli hostages that have been held by Hamas in Gaza for more than 2 years at this point, that they're going to be released either on Monday or Tuesday. And as you mentioned, this is a very delicate balancing act still, and we're still talking about phase one of this peace plan, but if all goes to plan, that's what's supposed to happen. And something, the president, I'm actually going to be traveling to the Middle East as well, because the president is going to likely take a trip to Egypt and Israel. We don't have those details. What do we know about this? Yeah, so the reason he spoke about Egypt specifically, he talked about a potential signing ceremony there. And Egypt and Qatar have been playing very important roles as mediators throughout this very long process. And so it looks like there's going to be some kind of signing ceremony there that Trump would be part of. And he also said that Israel's parliament has asked him to, the Israeli government has asked him to address parliament. So, again, these details are being worked out. It's no small thing to have the president travel to the Middle East, but it looks like we're going to have some combination of an Egypt and Israel trip for the president. There's
been talk of him being directly involved with the transfer of hostages and questions about speaking to a foreign legislature while our government is closed. Kate, we'll have a lot to talk about next week, it sounds like. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, many thanks, as always, for joining us. We now turn to Robert McWhirter as we get back to our top story and the indictment of Letitia James. He's a constitutional lawyer, practicing criminal defense and civil rights lawyer, also founder of the law office of Robert McWhirter. It's great to have you back, Robert. This is one, I'm guessing, that you could have said we saw coming. The president himself called for this to happen. And I wonder if you can draw some parallels here to what we saw with James Comey and whether you think this actually goes to trial.
Well, we did see this coming, but we only saw it coming because we have a president that's willing to really weaponize what should be objective prosecutorial decisions. It is coming. We saw it coming, but it's somehow, is it possible to be shocked and not surprised all at the same time? I mean, that's kind of my feelings about this right now. This is exactly like what's going on with James Comey. There is just no real sense of a probable cause here. And I must say that the prosecutors, including Pam Bondi, who are involved in this, should be seriously considering whether they're going to keep their law licenses after this.
Wow. Well, now that we know that that message on Truth Social or the post was supposed to be a direct message, Robert, that's why it only said Pam. I don't know how that would have affected things if she just got the DM, but she clearly acted on it after everyone made this public. Should that impact the element of the case when you see the president of the United States talking that way?
Oh, absolutely. Prosecutors have special duties not to have conflicts of interest, for instance, and this is clearly one. Look, let's do a comparison with Watergate. If you recall, in Watergate, there was a tremendous amount of effort spent getting the tapes. Richard Nixon said they were his tapes. The Supreme Court said, no, they belong to the people, and he didn't like what came out in those tapes. Here, you don't even have that fight. You just go to Donald Trump's Truth Social post, and you can see what the motivation is of this prosecution, and it is not probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed. It is the fickle whims of the President of the United States, and you cannot avoid that conclusion when you see his directions to Pam as opposed to the Attorney General of the United States.
Almost as if he was texting his personal lawyer.
Yes.
Robert, we heard from he who may be next, Senator Adam Schiff of California, Democrat, who the president has called to be prosecutor, was on the Senate floor a few moments ago, said this about the spate of indictments you and I are talking about. Let's listen.
Because now the president is using the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. This week it's James Comey, next week it will be someone else, and the week after that, who knows? It is a long and growing list of enemies. The president tweeting out who he wants prosecuted, he wants investigated, commanding, dictating vindictive prosecutions almost every day.
If you're Senator Schiff, Robert, this be a good time to take a little foreign vacation?
Actually, no. I think if I'm Senator Schiff, I'll take it and figure out that the American people are now going to be paying a huge judgment for the malicious prosecution without foundation that the Trump administration has foisted on the taxpayer. If you play these things out and look at the escalation here, you have James Comey, former official in the executive branch, who's now retired. Then you have a sitting attorney general of a state of New York, and then he's talking about a sitting senator of the United States. This implicates all kinds of separation of powers issue and federalism. And let's not forget something else. Remember, the Supreme Court gave what I thought was a very bad ruling on presidential immunity. But I don't believe that prosecuting your enemies is an official duty of the president of the United States. I don't think Donald Trump gets immunity from this either.
Wow. So Donald Trump out of office could, in fact, face legal action depending on the outcome of these trials?
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest with you, I believe this, among other things, is a potential article of impeachment using the justice system. And remember, Pam Bondi, as any attorney general, takes an oath to defend the Constitution. And we as attorneys take oaths to follow ethical rules. She doesn't take an oath to the President of the United States. She is not his personal attorney. She is supposed to be the attorney general. And if you recall, in Trump's first term, Jeff Sessions got in trouble for doing his job, following the Constitution, following his ethics, and Donald Trump made him pay. Well, Pam Bondi's not going to make that mistake, but I think she's making a far greater one.
We're going to have a lot more to talk about on this, Robert. I'm really glad you could jump on with us this evening. Robert McWhirter, constitutional lawyer, with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. We thank you. As we turn to the other major story we're following, and of course that is the government shutdown. Now on day 9, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson still live on Capitol Hill for us. And a shutdown that seems like it's never going to end. Erik, we had more voting today, more failures, rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah, there was a brief moment of hope. There was a trial balloon floated by Senate Republican leadership. If they could guarantee a vote on these expiring Obamacare subsidies by the end of the year, perhaps enough Democrats would come on board and vote to reopen the government. Senator Chuck Schumer, speaking to my colleague Steve Dennis, shot that down. Others who have voted in the past to keep the government open and this time are voting no, like Brian Schatz, also shooting that down. But it remains to be seen. I just ran into Angus King, one of the moderates who's involved in behind-the-scenes talks, and he says, he's headed to a secretive meeting to try to work out some kind of deal. So the talks are happening on a low level, but there's really a sense of pessimism. Mike Rounds was one of these Republicans engaging with Democrats, trying to convince them. He was very pessimistic today. He was saying, look, we're running out of time. Let's fix these Obamacare subsidies before these open enrollment notices go out, before people start dropping out of the exchanges, before costs start rising. And he's just very pessimistic. So it looks like a stalemate is really settling in here. We expect perhaps more CR votes on Friday. The Senate to go home for the long Columbus Day weekend. They've canceled this recess for next week, so they'll come back, try to do it again. And continuing debate about whether Trump's going to do mass firings or not. He has threatened that again today, but we still see no sign of it. So nothing really shaking loose yet here on Capitol Hill.
Day after day. Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. Thank you, Erik, as always, for the update. Earlier today, I spoke with Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia about all this. I started by asking her about the potential of progress being made on the shutdown. As Erik just mentioned, the Senate planning to reconvene next week, canceling that week's recess. Here's what she said.
Well, I hope so. I'm always an optimist, but I think it also indicates that, unfortunately, Senator Schumer and others are content to try to reap the political benefit that they're seeing from a shutdown. And I think we should be working, and we're going to be working through what would have been a week for us to be back in our home district. So I think it's right and proper that we would be back here in D.C.
Well, important to spend time with you as a senior member of the Appropriations Committee. And I just wonder what you're hearing, even in terms of back channels, about conversations between Democrats and Republicans. We had spent some time a couple days ago with Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who seemed optimistic that at least some quiet conversations among colleagues were happening. How about on your end?
Well, definitely conversations are happening. I think, we all want to see the government opened, and we have a very simple fix to this. Just simply open it with a 7-week extension and no strings attached. And that's what's been offered 6 times and rejected. So we're going to keep moving forward like this, because I think it's the simplest, most understandable, and easiest way for us to get back to our business, whether it's appropriating. I would hope that we could get back to the 3 appropriations bills that we passed already on the Senate floor, but also other bills that we've passed out of committee, bipartisan, and let us work our will on that to make sure that we put the right emphasis on spending for the government. And we can't do it right now while we're still in this shutdown. But I think I'm hopeful, as Senator Shaheen, I guess, was last week, that we can get through this. But it's a total disservice to the American people.
Yeah, well, there is a report now that John Thune is considering offering Democrats an up or down vote on extending Obamacare subsidies, presumably after the government would reopen. Would you support an olive branch like that if it means passing the CR?
If you look at what Senator Thune has said on the Senate floor numerous times, he has said to the Democrats and anybody who's listening, we're willing to negotiate and look at these subsidies, but we have to have the government open. And that's a simple proposition. And what blows back to me is, well, there's no trust. I disagree with that. I think our leader is very trustworthy and is a man of his word. And he will do this. He's told us he will do this. Many of us, I have 67,000 West Virginians who this is going to impact. So we need to get to the business of opening the government and then getting to the business of trying to find a solution here. And I think that's what he's been dedicated to the entire time, 9 days we've been shut down and before.
I was struck to learn that West Virginia has the 3rd highest number of federal employees per capita in the country. Senator, the president just moments ago was referring to permanent cuts And many Democrats talk to us about the psychological, if not financial, impact of the rescissions packages that passed, and now the threat of permanent layoffs that would, of course, impact a lot of people in your state if the president chose to target West Virginia. Is that a conversation we should be having right now? Because it doesn't seem to be bringing anyone to the table.
You know, I think what the president is doing is trying to find the pressure points to get Chuck Schumer and the Democrats to say, okay, let's reopen the government, and then we'll get to the business of discussing our priorities as senators through the appropriations process. That's a pretty simple concept right there. And I think the president's trying to create pressure points. So the only way to alleviate what he's saying is to get the government open, start paying people on time, and pay respect to our troops who are under duress now because they may miss their next paycheck. This is a disservice to them and many, many others. And we see stoppages at airports, and this is just going to begin to crop up. Simple thing, open the government, begin to negotiate. Yeah. Nobody's going to walk away from the negotiating table just because the government's open. When the government's open, that's when we negotiate.
I want to ask you about back pay for federal workers who are furloughed and will presumably return to work if not laid off. The president says there are some federal workers who did not deserve to be taken care of. That was his line the other day. I spoke with Speaker Johnson last evening, and he told me that there are different interpretations floating around, were his words, when it comes to the law that mandates federal workers be made whole following a shutdown. Is this up for grabs at this point, or do you have a clear view on this? Do you believe federal workers should be paid back?
Yes, my clear view is that federal workers should be paid back. This is no fault of their own. This is not because they didn't do something right. This is simply a political game that's being played so that their side can get better every day. That's what Chuck Schumer said just yesterday, I believe. So, no, I believe our federal workers should definitely get their back pay, and I think they will.
When it comes to layoffs, is that the purview of Russ Vought, as you understand it? As long as the government is shut down, does OMB make that decision, or should Congress have a say in it?
Well, I think that the OMB and the president do have greater latitude during a shutdown to make some cuts. We know that's the direction that the president has been wanting to go by enlisting DOJ to make some of those cuts, and there has been streamlining of a lot of these departments. I would think this is probably something that they're looking at very, very closely, but I think it's important to note this has not occurred. This has not occurred to this point, and the best way to alleviate that pressure point is to open the government.
Yeah. You mentioned air traffic control, what we're seeing at airports, and the delays are stacking up here. This is important for you as a member of the Commerce Committee, and we understand that federal funding for airports in rural areas by way of the Essential Air Service, the EAS, runs out on Sunday. This is a lifeline for rural airports that wouldn't otherwise be able to function. Money goes to carriers to kind of make up for what could be lost revenues in those areas. We're talking about 170 airports, roughly. Senator, you know what it's like to have rural areas in your state. Are these airports about to go dark?
Well, we do have several of these airports in our state, and my latest information is that, particularly when we're looking at the Clarksburg Airport, because that's who I most recently talked with, that Secretary Duffy has said that there's going to be funding there to keep these essential air services going. That it is critical to rural America, to other places that is not easy to get in and out of, and that pretty much is my whole state. So we want to keep that air service going. He says that he has the money to do it past the time of this week.
It sounds like that will come down to a community by community or airport by airport decision. Senator, more broadly, if we start seeing ground stops across the country, or more of them after we did yesterday in some pretty important hubs, do you think that's enough to dislodge a few Democrats to pass the CR?
I do. I think the pressure points certainly are travel. We're getting ready to have a 3-day weekend, with Monday being a holiday. And so I think that creates big pressure points for families that have planned things, that have saved for the year to go to visit a relative or go to have a nice little couple days off. people get mad. They get mad when their flight's canceled under regular circumstances. If they get delays because of government shutdowns, that definitely will up the anxiety. But I think this non-payment of our troops and non-payment of federal employees is another pressure point that comes October the 15th. So I'm hoping that we do a very simple reopen the government and then begin the negotiations.
The view of Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia as we move into what will be day 10 of the government shutdown. Continuing resolutions written by Republicans that passed in the House and another by Democrats that has not passed anywhere failed again today, and yet another attempt in the Senate. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power with breaking news coming out of Washington now. This is something we just learned about as we came to air. The Department of Justice and a grand jury indicting New York Attorney General Letitia James on a fraud charge, the latest case by the DOJ against a perceived enemy of President Donald Trump. The Associated Press reporting the indictment from the Eastern District of Virginia, one count of mortgage fraud. We'll have more ahead right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for being with us. Well, we have some major breaking news enveloping Washington this evening in Israel. The government is currently voting to ratify the late-night agreement between Israel and Hamas. Hamas agreeing to return all remaining hostages, dead or alive, to Israel, as the White House teases ahead to a potential presidential trip to the Middle East that could take place as soon as tomorrow. Listen.
Peace in the Middle East. We secured the release of all of the remaining hostages, and they should be released on Monday or Tuesday. Getting them is a complicated process. I'd rather not tell you what they have to do to get them. There are places you don't want to be, but we are getting the hostages back on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, and that'll be a day of joy. I'm going to try and make a trip over. We're going to try and get over there.
The president from a meeting with his cabinet earlier today. Joining us with his analysis is Aaron David Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, I thought of you when I woke up and saw the headlines this morning. I wondered first what you thought of this and whether you were surprised. We're hearing the word breakthrough a lot. Are you taking this at face value?
I am. I mean, I've been around Israeli-Palestinian negotiations for nearly a quarter of a century, mostly failing. Any agreement between Israelis and Palestinians that leads and can ameliorate conflict or alleviate human suffering is critically important. An agreement between Israel and Hamas is quite extraordinary. And I think the reality here is that we're not talking about peace. I think this is not a peace agreement. We may not even be talking about an inexorable end to the war in Gaza. That's going to depend on phase two, which involves many really difficult lifts on any number of issues. But right now, President of the United States and key Arab states have managed to create a break and a breakthrough in a war, which is now in its third year. And the cruelest parade of horrors visited on one another by Israelis and Palestinians, October 7, and then the Israeli response. So phase one, Joe, I think will come off reasonably well. There are always problems in releasing hostages and Israeli withdrawal, security prisoners, names of who Hamas wants on that list. The real lift will come as you try to make a transition from phase one to phase two. But right now, I'm not a religious man, but I'm offering a prayer for the hostages, their families, and the Palestinian civilians in Gaza that have suffered an extraordinary amount, along with the hostages who Hamas has kept.
Well, talk with us about the complexities involving a transfer of hostages like this. We've seen some pretty egregious displays when Hamas in the early phases was releasing hostages, and I know this will come at the same time as a massive release of Palestinian prisoners, 250 prisoners serving life sentences and 1,700 detained after the October 7th attacks. The president is going to be there for this as well, potentially complicating matters even more. Aaron, how would you orchestrate all of this as someone at the negotiating table?
Well, the Israelis and Palestinians have signed a document. I'm just actually taking a look at it, which is signed by the mediators. It calls for no orchestration of public displays with respect to return of hostages. The Israeli full cabinet will probably approve this within a matter of hours. Then there's a 24-hour period in which Israeli victims, families of victims of those Israelis killed, the 250 serving life sentences, those Israelis killed, their families have an appeal process. And the Israelis are releasing some very bad people among the 250. It's curious about the president's trip. I'm not sure of the timing. Would he go if there were bumps in the road that have to be ironed out? Or would he go assuming that this is going to proceed smoothly? I would think he'd want an assurance that the process, 72-hour period, that starts ticking once the Israeli cabinet approves the agreement. I would imagine he'd want to go with a high degree of confidence that this thing was working. The last thing you'd want is this to crater during a presidential visit.
Pretty remarkable to see the note passed by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to President Trump at an unrelated event yesterday. The president was talking about Antifa. Marco Rubio comes to whisper in his ear and handed him a note that an Associated Press photographer managed to zoom in on so we could actually read it. It said, "Very close. We need you to approve a Truth Social post soon so you can announce deal first." There's a picture now if you're watching us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube. Aaron, what do you make of the way this was rolled out by the president, and does he deserve the credit that he's seeking?
I mean, look, I worked for, I've been a part of every administration from Jimmy Carter to Bush 43. I've been around presidents, secretaries of state, and I can say to you, and I would include President Trump in 1.0, Obama and Biden, no president, Republican or Democrat, and I voted and worked for both of them. No president, Republican or Democrat, has ever brought the kind of pressure on an Israeli prime minister on an issue that that prime minister believed was vital, not just to his political survival, but given the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu conflates that political survival with what he considers to be the best security interests of the state of Israel. No president surrounding any U.S. brokered initiative has ever said to an Israeli prime minister, "We gave you a chance to look at this. You made some changes. We've given it to you before we've given it to the to Hamas. You need to comply, and we or I, if the reporting is accurate, will leave you if you don't." And I have to say, probably not since Eisenhower in 1956, when he threatened Ben Gurion. During the Suez Crisis, when the Israelis, the Brits, the French had orchestrated a campaign to seize the canal and depose Nasser. Not since Eisenhower threatened, and he meant it, political and economic sanctions against the Israeli government has a president been this tough with an Israeli prime minister. And I think, well, one question, of course, going forward, Joe, is whether or not that toughness, not just toughness, you need incentives and disincentives to get this thing done. But whether that focus, that attention the president this morning added this conflict to the other 7 that he's claimed to have resolved, hopefully the focus and attention moving into phase 2 will be there.
It's great to have you back. Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the voice we were looking for this evening. And the Nobel Peace Prize, incidentally, will be announced early tomorrow morning. To the other major breaking news we're following here, reports have just crossed before we came to air this evening. The Attorney General of the state of New York, Letitia James, has been indicted on at least one fraud charge, according to the Associated Press. This just a day after former FBI Director James Comey pleaded not guilty to his own indictment handed down by the DOJ. That news coming as Washington remains gridlocked in a shutdown stalemate. For more on the breaking news, the current situation with the shutdown, we're joined now by Republican Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas. Senator, it's good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I want to ask you about how we're going to get the government reopened here. But first, I would just love your reaction to this news now with Letitia James a day after James Comey was in court. Are you concerned about what many are calling the weaponization of the Department of Justice?
Well, I don't know any of the details of what she's charged with or whether it involved a grand jury and a jury of her peers. So I don't know. It doesn't seem appropriate for me to comment on something I don't know much or anything about. And two, I want the justice system to play out and justice to be done. We certainly don't want to weaponize, politicize prosecutions, but I don't know any of the facts that would suggest that to be the case or not the case.
I understand, and I don't want to force you to become our legal analyst this evening either, Senator, but a lot of folks are looking at that post on Truth Social in which the president addressed his note to Pam, of course, Bondi, the attorney general, and called for the indictments of folks like Comey and James. It is drawing questions, which I suspect you can understand. Do you need answers as a Republican yourself?
I do understand, and I think I do want answers to those questions. And the question is there a basis for a person's indictment, or is that indictment baseless because it was done for politics or for political pressure, not because somebody should be charged with a crime? I just don't know whether that's the case or not.
Got it. There's something called the Letitia Act that you may have heard about. In fact, some of your colleagues have put their names on it. John Cornyn, Deb Fisher, Steve Daines, John Kennedy, Roger Wicker, Ted Budd, Pete Ricketts. The law enforcement tools to interdict troubling investments in abodes. We do this really well with the acronyms in Washington. That spells Letitia. Would empower the administration to hold public officials who commit acts of bank fraud accountable. Are you in favor of that approach?
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I've not looked at that legislation. I just haven't. And I am for justice and want to make sure that justice is provided to all citizens, regardless of their standing and whether they're in disfavor or favor with a political party or a president. People deserve justice, and I want to see that result.
Well, I appreciate your answering those questions, Senator. If we can turn to what we were originally planning to talk about here with the government shutdown that's showing no signs of ending. You've been on Capitol Hill for a minute, I believe, in both chambers, and have a sense, I think, of what's supposed to be happening here when it comes to funding the government. Does it feel different this time? Because I keep hearing the trust has reached a new low and that we are nowhere near reopening.
Well, unfortunately, I think what you just described is the circumstance. It's certainly the way I see it. I don't know how many shutdowns there's been. I think shutdowns in and of themselves are failed government action. They're a mistake. I've never seen a shutdown that resulted in a good outcome. And I think the priority by my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, should be to take care of the issue at hand, keeping the federal government funded. And the difficulty we've had, and we now have a majority leader who is willing to work with the Appropriations Committee, of which I'm a member, to bring appropriation bills to the floor. We've passed 3 of the 12 appropriation bills. We have several more that are now ready, but we didn't get it done in time. So shame on the Congress, but give us the time of this continuing resolution till a little later in November to get the remaining bills done and keep the government open in the meantime. I wish we would never have a CR. I wish we'd never have a shutdown. But we need to get to avoid that. We need to get our work done, and we came close, but it hasn't happened yet. And the shutdown, and I gave remarks on the Senate floor today. I chair a subcommittee, and I'm an appropriator for the Department of Transportation, particularly aviation and space. And I mean, there's just consequences. I've had individual constituents and others tell me, shut her down, it doesn't matter. But I pointed out today that air traffic control and safety is in jeopardy in the sense that our air safety system is so fragile. I know this because of the plane from Wichita, Kansas on January the 29th and its crash at the Reagan National Airport. We are working to make certain our skies are safe, but a shutdown makes it less so. And so all these circumstances create problems for people, and we ought to be, as a country, I want our allies to know that we know how to work together. You talked about the distrust, plenty of distrust here. But we live in a dangerous world, and Republicans and Democrats ought to be working together. We ought to figure out how to have some level of trust one to the other. And that still exists, but it gets kind of messed up in the national machinations of American politics.
Understood. Well, I want to ask you, I'm glad you went there, because as chairman of the aviation subcommittee, I'm sure you've got a lot of concerns. We're already seeing ground stop at a number of major airports. There are concerns that sick outs could become a real issue, particularly if the unions get involved, the spills into another week. But maybe more importantly, more immediately, on Sunday, the essential air service is going to run out of money. This is the service that's been in place since the late 70s that helps to fund carriers to serve rural airports that may not be profitable on those routes otherwise. You've got a pretty good sense of this, not only from your committee, but also being in Kansas. Are some rural airports going to go dark after this weekend?
So we don't know. I would think it would last a little longer than this weekend. The administration has said they're going to fund those airports that the Department of Transportation is loaning the Essential Air Service Program dollars. But that's not, that doesn't continue forever. And I would guess some of our listeners would not know about the Essential Air Service Program, but when the airlines were deregulated, money was set aside to make sure that our small airports had commercial service too. There are 5 of those airports in Kansas. It matters in getting to the doctor, getting doctors into the community. It matters in just business travel, and the economic benefit of air service to a small town is huge. And so we're advocating, I've introduced legislation previously to protect those funds, to make sure they're available. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's just one more example of where, when people say the government doesn't matter, shut it down, there are consequences to their actions. And I'm certainly willing to have conversations. Let's get the government open, and then let's figure out how we solve other problems. You know, as a Kansan, you talk about where I come from. I have a lot of concern about about farmers in Kansas and the need for disaster assistance, economic assistance, weather-related drought assistance. And that's something we could be demanding be on the continuing resolution, just as Democrats are demanding that the Affordable Care Act credits are on that resolution. I'm willing to wait till we get government funded, functioning, our appropriation bills working across the floor, and then go to bat for other issues that others in Congress may not agree with me with. Can we agree that we ought to fund the government? That seems like a basic thing. Get it done, and then let's have our conversations in a level of trust in trying to get the things that each individual member of Congress or a group of members of Congress or a political party care a lot about.
Senator, I'm glad you could come talk to us. Come back and talk to us about the veterans next time. You're, of course, chair of the VA committee in the Senate, and we appreciate your view. Jerry Moran of Kansas, thank you so much. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll continue the conversation on what's next for the shutdown with our political panel. Straight ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. Fed Governor Lisa Cook, former FBI Director James Comey, and now New York Attorney General Letitia James, all subjects of investigations by the DOJ, as the country's leading law enforcement agency seemingly takes its cues from the president in going after his perceived political enemies. He has spoken about this out loud. Letitia James responding tonight after the breaking news of her indictment hit. James writing, quote, "This is nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system. I am not fearful. I am fearless. We will fight these baseless charges aggressively, and my office will continue to fiercely protect New Yorkers and their rights," unquote. Joining us now with their reaction to this story and more, there's a lot to talk about today. Our political panel, Greta Joins, Policy Director of Brownstein Hyatt, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki, former senior advisor to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. It's great to have you both with us here. What's your reaction to the allegations that you're hearing that the president has turned the Department of Justice into his own personal law firm?
I would disagree with ultimately that sentiment. I think the attorneys at the Department of Justice would likely disagree with that as well. I think that there are certainly opportunities to go and root out crime, be it whomever has committed those. And I think that it is important that as the president looks back on the indictments that were waged against him going into the election with the sole goal of putting him in jail so he could not run for president, ultimately investigating those people that brought those baseless charges against him. It's an important thing to ultimately understand where they are, what they were doing, and ultimately if they were following the law as they should be.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Comey, there were some lawyers at the DOJ who did not choose to take part in this and refused to in the Eastern District of Virginia. So they brought some up from South Carolina to finish the job. The thing that people are looking at is that post on Truth Social where the president addressed the note to Pam. And it turns out, according to the Wall Street Journal, that was supposed to be a direct message. He posted it for us all to see. What does that tell you?
I think it tells us that it's not conspiratorial to believe that he is directing the Attorney General of the United States to prosecute his political opponents. And I think when you look at the breadth of groups and people that they're attacking, he's attacking progressive organizations, he's attacking wealthy Democratic donors, and now he's attacking elected officials like Adam Schiff, Tish James, and Lisa Cook on the Fed, simply because he views them as standing in the way of his agenda. And I think what's notable is that Pew put out a survey yesterday that showed even 40% of Republicans believe that he is improperly using the federal government to attack his political opponents. And so 62% of Americans total believe that's happening. And I think, if this were not selective prosecution, if this were not political, there are 3 members of Trump's cabinet who have similar issues with mortgage filings that have not been referred for indictment. And so I think if it's not selective, if it's not political, then they should also be referred likewise.
Of course, Greta, the president and many Republicans accuse Joe Biden of weaponizing the Department of Justice, the exact same criticism, same charge that this president is hearing now. Donald Trump also ran on retribution, a word that he used frequently here, and said that he would go after his political enemies. How could this be anything less?
I mean, I think it's certainly true that all of the people that you mentioned were very much against Donald Trump winning another term as president. Those multiple things can be true here. I think as the president has looked at ultimately rooting out corruption and the weaponization of the Department of Justice under Joe Biden, I think it's an important thing that he goes out and finds out those individuals and those entities that were existing in that structure under Joe Biden and looking for ways to ultimately ensure that it does not happen again. And the next Republican that Democrats will ultimately characterize as somehow worse than President Trump doesn't suffer the same fate and ultimately are indicted for some other trumped up charge by the next Letitia James.
If you're Senator Adam Schiff, would you be waiting for a knock at the door?
Probably. I think that they've made it very clear who is on their target list. I think what's so alarming, to the point that Greta made, is that this is not going to stop with this president. And this is an expansion of federal power that no president should have, Democrat or Republican. And once you start down this path of weaponizing DOJ, weaponizing FHFA's, mortgage fraud investigations, it gets really ugly really fast. And I think any responsible elected officials, whether it was Senator Moran, who, correctly, I think, said we don't have any facts yet.
Yeah, right.
We need to pump the brakes and really think clearly about whether this is the path we want to go down in our country or if we want to pull back while we still can.
We've got less than 2 minutes here, but I need to ask you both about the shutdown. There is reporting today that John Thune is considering offering Democrats an up or down vote on extending Obamacare subsidies in return for signing the continuing resolution. If I could hear from both of you on this, do you think that is what ends this standoff?
I'm not sure.
Would you support it to begin with?
I mean, I think giving senators the opportunity to really vote up or down and put their money where their mouth is ultimately on what they want. I think what has been frustrating for Republicans, in particular House Republicans that have already passed the CR, is really understanding where Democrats are and what they want, right? Do they want to begin a discussion ultimately on why the Affordable Care Act is unaffordable and why we need to keep increasing subsidies in order to make it affordable to the American people? Or do they specifically want COVID-era subsidies in perpetuity?
Well,
and those things are very different.
Let's ask Caitlin. What do you think?
I think if they offer Democrats a permanent extension of the ACA subsidies in exchange for voting on the CR, they will take it.
A permanent extension?
I think so. Maybe even a short-term one.
Okay.
But Democrats have been very clear that this is about ACA subsidies.
Yes.
The question I have is whether House Republicans will agree to that. And so I think that in the Senate, both sides have been working pretty diligently to find a way to yes. They're still pretty far apart, but they're at least talking. the House Republicans aren't even in town. And so that, for me, is the real question.
Well, this could go on for quite a bit longer, and we'll be talking about it all the way through it. Greta Joins and Caitlin Legacki, thank you for a great conversation. We invite you to check out the Washington Edition newsletter. If you haven't gotten the hint, you've got a lot to read about. Find it on the terminal and online. A very busy day in the Capitol, and we thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.